On this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly, we take a look at one of the most notorious launches in the history of video games, the North American launch of the Sega Saturn. In the early 1990s, Sega of America went from being a non-factor in the North American home video game market to standing toe-to-toe with the only factor that still mattered. The Genesis launched a full 2 years before the Super Nintendo and used that advantage to carve out a sizable chunk of the market, particularly with older gamers looking to move on from their childhood NES. This was due in large part to the new CEO of Sega of America, Tom Kalinske, who famously convinced Sega of Japan to drop the price of the Genesis and replace Altered Beast with Sonic the Hedgehog as the pack-in game.
The Sonic Boom. Sonic the Hedgehog, now included when you buy a Genesis system.
This same time period also saw continued success for Sega in the arcades. The development of the Sega Model 1 arcade system gave birth to both Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter, and the Model 2 system debuted in 1993 with Daytona USA, which went on to become one of the highest-grossing arcade games of all time. In August of 1991, the Super Nintendo was launched in North America, which to many signaled the real beginning of the 16-bit console war. The Sega CD was released in 1992 and was home to a handful of AAA titles, including Sonic CD, Final Fight CD, and several releases from localization house Working Designs. Although the system was never more than a moderate success, it helped create a strong working relationship between Sega of America and Olaf Olafsson of Sony Electronic Publishing. Agreeing that optical media was the future of video games, the two groups jointly drew up specifications for what a CD-based next-generation console should look like, and traveled to Japan to present their idea to Sony engineer Ken Kutaragi. Sega of America was motivated to work with Sony because it would spread out the losses incurred on hardware sales, and Sony recognized that it was Sega who had the needed brand recognition and experience in the video game market. Kalinske presented the idea to Sega of Japan president Hayao Nakayama, who rejected it, seeing no value in a collaboration with Sony. This decision by Nakayama was a harbinger of not only the end of Kalinske's near-free reign as CEO of Sega of America, but of Sega's decline and ultimate demise in the American home video game market. In late 1994, the 32X was released for $159.99 as an add-on device for the Genesis. The system included dual 32-bit processors and had the ability to display far more colors and process more polygons than the Genesis.
Welcome to the fantasy zone. Get ready.
Although the 32X was positively received out of the gate, opinion quickly soured as quality games failed to materialize post-launch, and gamers began to suspect that the 32X was nothing more than a stopgap measure designed to hold them over until the Saturn's release the following year. Around the same time that the 32X was hitting store shelves here in America, the Saturn was making its way into the hands of gamers in Japan. The system features a double-speed CD-ROM drive and does include a cartridge slot, but this is used only for RAM expansion and memory backup units, and not for playing cartridge-based video games. The console is powered by the same dual Hitachi SH2 CPUs found in the 32X, running at 28.6 MHz, dual display video processors, and a sound chip designed by Yamaha specifically for the Saturn and Sega's STV arcade hardware. While this made the Saturn a technological powerhouse at the time of its release, it also made the system much more challenging to program for. The system launched in Japan for 44,800 yen, which at the time was around $450 US. The system did not include a pack-in game, but the port of arcade hit Virtua Fighter sold at a near 1-to-1 ratio, and Sega completely sold out of its initial 200,000 unit shipment. Although Sega of Japan initially refused to work with Sony because of their lack of experience in the industry, they grew increasingly concerned about the PlayStation as hype for the system built. The two consoles were originally scheduled to be released just a week apart, with the Saturn to launch on Saturday, September 2nd, dubbed Saturn Day. As North America was their strongest market at the time, Sega wanted to cede no ground here and decided to get the jump on the PlayStation by making what turned out to be a mistake that would have far-reaching implications. On May 11, 1995, at the inaugural Electronics Entertainment Expo, Kalinsky announced that the Saturn was available immediately, Sega having already shipped 30,000 units to select retailers. Kalinsky also announced the price of the Saturn, $399, making it the most expensive console that Sega had ever released. In their own presentation later that day, president of Sony's American PlayStation Group Steve Race, who had previously been Kalinsky's right-hand man at Sega, made his now famous $299 speech.
$299.
While the math gets a bit fuzzier once you realize that the PlayStation did not come bundled with a game, while the Saturn did not require the purchase of a memory card, this price difference was still a serious obstacle in the eyes of many consumers. Because the decision to launch early was made on short notice, there was limited stock on hand to ship to retailers, creating an unnecessary hardware shortage. Because the Saturn was at first limited to a handful of retail partners, those who were left out of the early launch felt burned by Sega, and in fact KB Toys refused to carry the Saturn once the hardware was widely available. Developers, both first and third party, who had planned to have games ready for the September release were also taken by surprise and had no chance to ready their games for the new launch date. As a consequence, early adopters were aggravated, as only a handful of new games were released prior to the original September launch date. While at one time he had been given free rein to run things as he saw fit, the success that Tom Kalinsky achieved with Sega of America did not occur in Japan, where the Mega Drive took a backseat to both the PC Engine and the Super Famicom. Ironically, it was Kalinsky's success in America that eventually drove a wedge between himself and Sega of Japan. Having been all but stripped of his power as the CEO of Sega of America, the man who had made Sega relevant in the home video game market would resign his position in the summer of 1996. In 1997, Sega ceased both production of the Genesis and development of Genesis software, and in 1998 licensed it to Majesco to re-release as a budget system. Kalinsky's replacement, Bernie Stolar, publicly stated at the 1997 Electronic Entertainment Expo that the Saturn was not Sega's future, helping to kill off what little support the system had left. This effectively left Sega without a flagship product, and by the end of that summer, Sega's market share had dropped to 12%. But while the Saturn was a commercial failure here in the United States, it had and still has a loyal fan base thanks in part to a huge library of games from Japan, where the system was Sega's most successful, and a strong lineup of first-party games here in North America. Developed by Sega AM2 and the legendary Yu Suzuki, Virtua Fighter was the original pack-in game for the Saturn. A port of Sega's 1993 arcade hit, it was the first fully 3D fighting game, paving the way for franchises like Tekken, Dead or Alive, and Soul Calibur. There are 8 characters to choose from, and as is generally the case, each has their own strengths and weaknesses, although I have to say that I really don't care if Lao's hobby is Chinese poetry. Unlike other fighting games of the day, Virtua Fighter uses only 3 buttons for punch, kick, and block.
Ready, go!
The game does feature combo moves, but they are much more restrained than either Street Fighter's fireballs or Mortal Kombat's finishing moves. Perhaps the real strength of Virtua Fighter lies in this simplicity. As the old saying goes, this game is easy to learn but difficult to master. Both the music and the sound effects are a serious step up from fighters of the 16-bit era, but graphically the game looks okay compared to the rest of the launch titles. The original Model 1 arcade hardware was only capable of rendering flat-shaded polygons, giving the game a very simple look. Ironically, while this was not seen as cutting edge at the time, it's actually made the game age more gracefully than other 3D games of that era. I have mixed feelings about Virtua Fighter being the pack-in for the Saturn. I'm not sure that a fighting game has the widespread appeal that you want out of a pack-in title, and I don't think that it does the best job of showing off what the Saturn was capable of, as it wasn't that much of an improvement over the 32X version of the game. Virtua Fighter was only the Saturn's pack-in game for 5 months, as it was replaced in early October by Virtua Fighter Remix, which was an updated port of the original game produced by Sega AM1 in response to criticisms of the original release. Remix features higher polygon count character models and texture-mapped graphics, and was given away for free to anyone who had registered their Saturn console by the time of the game's release. Two sports games were available at launch for the Saturn, although they were based on the two least popular sports here in North America. The first, Worldwide Soccer Sega International Victory Goal Edition, is a mouthful but is also a decent arcade-style soccer game. It includes 12 national teams from around the globe and offers 5 game modes, including a single-game exhibition, 2 different league modes, a tournament mode, and a penalty shootout mode. The game also includes support for up to 4 players using Saturn's optional 6-player adapter. While I'm not really a fan of soccer or soccer video games, I found Worldwide Soccer to be quite playable and had a lot of fun playing it for this episode. While not a full-on arcade-style soccer game, it also doesn't try too hard to be ultra-realistic, making it approachable for any gamer. The game is light on fouls, really only calling one if you slide tackle a player from behind, in which case you're likely to get yellow carded. The graphics are bright and detailed, and you have your choice of multiple camera angles. The soundtrack is dominated by generic guitar rock, but thankfully can be disabled in the options menu. You can also choose to overlay a map of the entire playfield in one corner of the screen, allowing you to see the positions of your teammates, but I found this generally unnecessary. If I were going to complain about anything, it would be the game's AI, which at times can act stupidly. Other than that, this is a great game that would have been especially fun if you were looking for something to play with a group of friends. The other sports title released for the Sega Saturn at launch was Pebble Beach Golf Links. When I was a kid, my parents took me on a weekend trip to Carmel, California, where the Pebble Beach Golf Course is located. For some reason, that trip instilled in me a fascination with that course that resulted in my asking for and actually getting Bandai Golf Challenge Pebble Beach for the NES, which, believe it or not, I actually played to death, even though it was far from the best golf game on the system. The intro for Pebble Beach Golf Links looks like it came from an early 80s network drama like Dallas. This was the 4th Pebble Beach Golf title released by T&E Soft, the first 3 being released for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and 3DO. Pebble Beach Golf Links contains all the trappings of your average golf game, including stroke and match play. Or you can just watch a game, although I can't imagine why you'd want to. You can play with up to 4 total players, which can be any combination of human and computer controlled, and multiplayer play does not require the 6-player adapter. You can register a player profile, allowing the game to track all your stats, which is definitely a cool feature to have if you're really going to sink your teeth into the game. Before you start a round, you have to pick a graphical representation for both your player and your caddy. I turn the caddy off in the options menu because they're basically useless, which is why you won't see him in any of the footage. Speaking of the player graphics, they're all created using digitized video of real actors, which became a common practice with golf games in the 32-bit era. The game's graphics are too vivid to be considered photorealistic, which I actually prefer. The colors really pop and there's enough detail in the backgrounds to give this game a much more authentic feel than golf games of the 16-bit era. The game also makes use of digitized sound effects, which adds to the level of realism. The background music is pretty standard Muzak-style golf fare, and while it would be nice if I had the option of turning it off, it's unobtrusive enough to tolerate through 18 holes. Before you start each hole, in a full-motion video-based course guide, 80s and 90s PGA Tour mainstay Craig the Walrus Stadler gives you some useful tips.
First hole at Pebble Beach is a short but relatively difficult par 4.
Pebble Beach Golf Links compares quite favorably with the excellent PGA Tour Golf 96, which was released on the PlayStation the same year. The nod has to go to the PGA Tour game, however, as it includes multiple courses, while this game features only the Pebble Beach course. Still, if you were both a Sega Saturn owner and a golf fan in 1995, this game would definitely fit the bill. Panzer Dragoon was developed by Sega AM6, better known as Team Andromeda, and was the brainchild of then 23-year-old Yukio Futatsugi. The game takes place in some distant future where humans are living in the fallout of a great war, but frankly the plot is much too complicated for an arcade-style game and basically just involves you riding a dragon fighting monsters. Panzer Dragoon is a 3D rail shooter, similar in execution to games like Space Harrier or Star Fox. As your dragon flies through each level on a predetermined course, you move your aiming reticle around the screen, shooting monsters that pop into view. The dragon will follow the path of the reticle to a certain extent, allowing you to dodge enemy fire and avoid stationary obstacles. You can also hold down the fire button to highlight multiple enemies, so that when you release the button, you fire a multi-shot that takes them all out at the same time. At the end of each level, you face off against a boss, after which you're shown a cutscene which reveals new plot points. In addition to the standard controller, Panzer Dragoon is also compatible with both the 3D controller and the Sega Mission Stick, although neither were available at launch. The most notable aspect of Panzer Dragoon has to be its art style. Futatsugi drew inspiration from a variety of sources, including the comic book Arzak by French artist Jean Giraud, in which the protagonist rides a pterodactyl through a surreal landscape. Giraud would later supply the cover art for the Japanese release of the game. Panzer Dragoon was scored by the late Yoshitaka Azuma, a synthesizer composer in the 1980s who was writing music for television when approached to compose the music for this game. Much like a film soundtrack, Azuma did not write the music for Panzer Dragoon until the game had already been completed, and wrote pieces specifically timed for each level. With apologies to fans of Virtua Fighter, Panzer Dragoon would, in my opinion, have been the best pack-in game out of the North American launch lineup. The cumbersome plot aside, the game is an artistic masterpiece, isn't terribly long, shows off the power of the Saturn, and is very approachable to gamers of all types. Clockwork Knight, known in Japan by its full name, Clockwork Knight Pepero Chow's Adventure First Volume is a 2.5D side-scrolling platform game developed by Sega and co-produced by Noriyoshi Oba, who regular viewers of the show will recognize as the director of Revenge of Shinobi and the Streets of Rage series. In this game, you take control of Sir Tongara de Pepero Chow III, who is trying to win the favor of Clockwork Fairy Princess Chelsea when she's kidnapped by Lord knows who. You have to fight your way through the entire house, killing brainwashed enemy toys with your key, and fighting a boss at the end of every level. Speaking of which, could this boss be any freaking creepier? I'm 38 and that's the kind of stuff that my nightmares are made of. The bottle caps that you pick up throughout the game can be gambled away between levels or can be saved up and used to buy continues once your game ends. You also have the opportunity to earn an extra life at the end of every level by jumping onto whatever letter is missing from the marquee. Using a graphical technique pioneered by Rare and used in games like Donkey Kong Country, the graphics in Clockwork Knight are pre-rendered two-dimensional sprites of high-res 3D models, giving the game a three-dimensional look without actually using 3D graphics. The colorful graphics are supplemented with a great soundtrack, and each track fits the level in which it's featured quite nicely. Clockwork Knight also has standout sound effects, which maybe doesn't seem like a big deal, but adds to the overall experience of the game. Clockwork Knight is a reasonably good game, but I'm not sure who its target audience was. At first blush, it looks like a kid's game, but the at times frustrating difficulty and sometimes creepy imagery tends to dispel that notion. At the same time, I can't see an adult grabbing this game off the shelf and wanting to buy it out of anything but desperation for the lack of games released for the system post-launch. This is the kind of game that I could have seen myself renting on a Friday night and being fully ready to return by the end of the weekend. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy playing it for a while, but much like a visiting out-of-town relative, it managed to wear out its welcome before too long. Daytona USA is, I suspect, the most well-known game from the Saturn's launch lineup. Like Virtua Fighter, it was developed by Sega AM2, and although it was produced by Yu Suzuki, the game was designed by Toshihiro Nagoshi, who would go on to design the Super Monkey Ball games on the GameCube.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
Rather obviously, Daytona USA is an arcade racing game based on American stock cars. The game includes 3 tracks, 1 oval and 2 circuits. In arcade mode, you only have the standard Hornet available, but in Saturn mode there are a wide variety of cars to choose from. Daytona USA was originally released in 1994 on Sega's Model 2 arcade hardware, which was capable of texture mapping, a notable improvement over the flat-shaded polygons of Model 1 games. A lot is made of the game's very noticeable draw-in, but is it really that big of a deal? While the arcade game ran at 60 frames per second, the Saturn port runs at less than 30, but unless a game is literally choppy, I can't say that frame rate really sticks out to me. Those horses look pretty cool. Too bad you can't ride them. Wait a minute! Daytona USA is also compatible with the 3D control pad and the Arcade Racer joystick. While this wheel is a huge improvement for some of Sega's later arcade racers, I can't say that it really makes things any better for this game. Probably the most recognizable feature of Daytona USA is its memorable soundtrack, composed, written, and sung by Takenubo Mitsuyoshi. If I were going to buy 2 games at launch in addition to Virtua Fighter, it definitely would have been Panzer Dragoon and this game. Daytona USA gets a lot of guff for being a bit buggy, but in my opinion it's every bit as fun as Ridge Racer on the PlayStation, but with way more personality. That's going to wrap up this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.